I can't stand that old person's smell anymore. Every time she hugs me, that sickening perfume sticks to me for hours. That's what I heard as I passed by the hallway leading to the meeting room of EcoGuard, the startup my son Eric and his wife, Jessica, had founded 2 years ago. I stopped immediately, feeling as though I'd been slapped. My heart raced as I leaned against the cold hallway wall, trying to process what I'd just heard. Before I continue, tell me in the comments which city you're reading this story from and if you've ever experienced something similar, and don't forget to subscribe to the channel so you don't miss stories like this one. Susan is nice and all, but that perfume, Jessica continued, her melodious voice now laden with disdain. It's so 80s, such a grandma smell. I heard laughter. One of them was my son's. That hurt more than any business deal I'd ever lost. That morning, I had transferred $75,000 to their business account. It was the 6th transfer I'd made in the last 8 months, totaling $350,000 invested in my only son's dream. Money that now supported Jessica's impeccable gel nails, her new car, and that Armani blazer she wore to important meetings. I took a deep breath, smelling my perfume, the same Chanel No. 5 I've worn for more than 3 decades. The perfume my husband, James, gave me when we bought our first commercial property in Boston. The perfume I sprayed before entering rooms, full of men who doubted a 27-year-old woman could build a real estate empire. The same perfume I wore at Eric's birth. The same I sprayed when I buried my mother. The same that gave me strength when bankers denied me loans before I owned properties in 3 different states. I adjusted my posture, as I always did before difficult negotiations, and entered the room with the smile I'd learned to maintain even when they called me sweetheart in business meetings. "Good afternoon," I said, watching Jessica's expression change in milliseconds, from laughter to practiced composure. "Susan, what a wonderful surprise." She stood to hug me, her eyes not meeting mine. I noticed she stepped back more quickly than normal. Was it to escape my old person's smell? "I brought the transfer documents," I said, placing the folder on the table. "I thought it would be better to deliver them personally." Eric looked embarrassed but recovered quickly. "Mom, you didn't need to trouble yourself. You could have emailed them." "Some things still deserve a personal touch, son," I replied, feeling the weight of my words. "How's the sustainable filtration project for textile industries coming along?" The question was a test. I knew that filtration technology was supposedly EcoGuard's flagship project, the reason I had invested so much money. But I also knew, through industry contacts, that the project had been practically stalled for months. "We're in the final testing phase," Jessica responded enthusiastically, her voice reaching that high pitch I recognized as a sign of lying. "The results are promising, but you know how time-consuming these processes can be." "I do," I said, looking directly into her eyes. "That's why I asked Michael from the Environmental Analysis Laboratory in Atlanta to verify the progress. Curiously, he didn't find any test records for the past 3 months. The silence that followed was so dense I could almost touch it. Jessica nervously fidgeted with the pearl necklace I had given her last Christmas, another expensive gift she probably considered old lady stuff. "There must be some misunderstanding," Eric intervened, his voice trembling slightly. I looked at my only son, so much like his father. James had always been the balance in our family, the university professor who brought sensibility to my more impulsive decisions. Since his heart started failing 3 years ago, forcing his early retirement, Eric had become more vulnerable to external influences, especially Jessica's. "Perhaps," I conceded, taking out my phone. "Let's call Michael right now to clear up the misunderstanding." "Susan, today isn't a good time," Jessica interrupted, her New York accent intensifying with nervousness. "We have a video conference with investors in 5 minutes." What investors? I asked calmly, knowing there was no meeting scheduled. I still had access to the company's corporate calendar, a detail Jessica had apparently forgotten. They're international investors. Very discreet, she stammered. That's when I noticed the sparkle on her left hand. A new ring with a diamond that certainly wasn't there the previous week when we had dinner as a family. Beautiful ring, I commented. Early birthday present. Her birthday wouldn't be until October, 4 months away. Yes, she answered, instinctively hiding her hand. Eric surprised me. I looked at my son, who seemed genuinely confused. He hadn't bought any ring. The blush on his cheeks confirmed it. The room fell, silent again. It was in real estate that I learned to let silences work in my favor. People always try to fill them, usually with inconvenient truths or even more revealing lies. Actually, Jessica finally broke the silence. It was a present I gave myself. The company started making a profit last month, and I thought I deserved a reward. Another lie. I had complete access to the company's financial records. There was no profit at all, just a constant flow of my money being drained for expenses. That now began to make sense. Curious, I replied, taking out my phone and opening the banking app, because I just transferred $75,000 to you, since the company supposedly needed capital to continue operating. Jessica's expression changed. Her eyes, always calculating, now showed something between fear and anger. Eric seemed lost, as if trying to piece together a puzzle that I had already solved long ago. Mom, I think we need to talk about this another time. Eric spoke, his voice almost a whisper. And what would you do if you discovered that your hard-earned money is being used to buy jewelry while your son's company sinks? I asked, not to him, but as a reflection to myself. I stood up, feeling the weight of my 58 years, but also the strength they'd given me. The wisdom to recognize when I'm being deceived. The courage to face the truth, even when it hurts. Susan, it's not what it looks like, Jessica tried, her tone now conciliatory. I can explain everything. I'm sure you can, I responded. You always have brilliant explanations, Jessica. That's how you convinced my son that your childhood was difficult, when in fact your father owns one of the largest construction companies in New York. Eric's eyes widened. It was evident he didn't know this. How? How do you know? Jessica stammered. I know many things, I replied, picking up my bag. In real estate, information is power. And contrary to what you think, we old people know how to obtain information in the digital world. I walked to the door, then turned around. Eric looked devastated. My mother's heart wanted to protect him, but I knew he needed to see the truth for himself. The complete report of the company's expenses for the last 6 months is in that folder, I pointed to the table, including the 3 days you spent at that resort in the Hamptons last month, Jessica, while claiming to be at a sustainability conference in Washington, D.C. That was a business trip, she protested, her voice an octave higher. Interesting. I didn't know that Leonardo, your ex-boyfriend from college, now works with you, I commented, watching her face turn pale. Did you share the same room to save on company accommodation? Very sustainable of you. I left the room feeling the perfume that has accompanied me for decades. The same perfume that now carried the bitter scent of betrayal, but also the strength to face it. In the elevator, I looked at my reflection in the mirror. The gray hair I'd started to leave natural 2 years ago, the expression lines around, my eyes marks of an intense life. Old person smell, she had said. If only she knew that these old people built empires while she was still playing businesswoman. As I left the commercial building in downtown Atlanta, I breathed in the afternoon air. I called James. I needed his wisdom now. Hi, my love. His voice always calmed me, even after 35 years of marriage. How was the meeting? I think our son is going to need us more than ever, I replied as I got into my car. Jessica? He asked, knowing how to read between the lines as he always did. Yes, I answered simply. Come home, he said. I'll make that chamomile tea you like. I smiled, thinking about how James, with his quiet, observant manner, had always known something was wrong with Jessica. He never said it explicitly, respecting our son's choice, but his silences after family dinners spoke volumes. I drove through Atlanta's streets, thinking about how it all began. How Eric brought Jessica home to meet us 3 years ago. How she charmed everyone with his studied charisma and emotional stories about overcoming hardship. How my instinct warned me when she started talking about her revolutionary idea for sustainable filters, and her eyes gleamed differently upon discovering that I owned commercial properties in 3 states. The luxurious wedding that James and I secretly paid for, while Jessica told everyone how she and Eric saved for every detail. The apartment in Buckhead, Atlanta's upscale neighborhood, another gift from us disguised as a generous lease agreement. All the puzzle pieces finally fit together. At a stoplight, I received a message from Eric. We need to talk, Mom. You were right about everything. My mother's heart ached, but I also felt relief. The truth, however painful, always sets you free, and my son was finally beginning to see it. I remembered all the times I'd been underestimated in life, the meetings where older men called me young lady while I bought buildings from under their noses, how I used each challenge as a stepping stone. Now it was my son's turn to learn this lesson, and I would be by his side with my old person smell and all the wisdom it carries. When I arrived home, James was waiting for me on the porch of our house in Ansley Park with 2 cups of tea and that look that said, I'm here for whatever you need. Without words, he knew. I sat beside him watching the sunset over Atlanta, the city we chose to raise our son and build our life, the city where I started my empire with a single commercial space in Midtown more than 30 years ago. Will he be okay? James finally asked. He will, I replied, holding his hand. He's our son. He has your kindness and my strength. He'll overcome this. At that moment, my phone rang again. It was Eric. I'm coming home. Can we talk? I replied with a simple yes, knowing it would be a difficult but necessary conversation. The sun was setting over Atlanta as I waited for my son's arrival, ready to help him rebuild what Jessica had destroyed. Not with money this time, but with something much more valuable, the truth. I sprayed my perfume once more, now with a new sense of pride. The smell that Jessica so despised was the aroma of a woman who built her path in a world that doubted her. And now, that same perfume would be the scent of truth that would free my son. And you, have you ever smelled betrayal? Have you ever realized you were being deceived by someone close to you? How did you react? The living room clock showed 8:37 p.m. when I heard Eric's car engine parking in the driveway. James squeezed my hand before getting up to open the door. I took a deep breath, feeling the weight of the moment to come. When Eric entered, I immediately noticed something had changed. His eyes, always so much like his father's, gentle and confident, were now red and carried a mixture of disappointment and anger that I had never seen before. He looked like he had aged years in just a few hours. Son, James embraced him for a long time, in that way only a father knows how, when he realizes his son is broken inside. Eric broke down in his father's arms, sobbing like he hadn't since childhood, when he fell off his bike and broke his arm at 8 years old. My instinct was to run to him, but I held back. Some moments belong only to father and son, I learned that over the years. When he finally pulled away, Eric looked at me. There was no need for words. I walked to him and hugged him, feeling his trembling body against mine. He took a deep breath and pulled away slightly. "Mom, I'm so sorry." His choked voice could barely form the words. "You were trying to warn me all this time and I—" "Shh." I put my finger on his lips, as I did when he was little and blamed himself for something trivial. "Let's sit down. We have time." In the living room, James served whiskey for the three of us. We weren't frequent drinkers, but some conversations require the warmth of alcohol to flow. "After you left," Eric began, twirling the glass between his fingers without drinking, "I confronted Jessica about everything. The ring, the trip to the Hamptons, the lies about her childhood." He took a long sip of whiskey before continuing. "She tried to deny it at first, but when she saw the documents you left—" He shook his head, incredulous. "It was like a mask fell off, Mom. Suddenly I didn't recognize the woman I married anymore." James sighed beside me. He always said that eyes are the windows to the soul. Jessica kept her windows well closed, except when talking about money. Then they flung open, revealing an almost feverish ambition. "She confessed everything," continued Eric. "Not just the company misappropriations, but—" His voice failed. "She's been cheating on me for months with Leonardo, her ex from college." I felt my stomach sink. I suspected the financial irregularities, but wasn't certain about the infidelity. I had only mentioned Leonardo's name as a shot in the dark, based on a photo I saw on her Instagram months ago, where she smiled too much next to a colleague. "And there's more," Eric continued, now with a choked voice. "I found a file on her laptop called 5-Year Plan. It was basically a script of how—" He swallowed hard. "How she planned to marry me, get part of the properties through the partial community property regime, and eventually get rid of you two, so we would have access to the complete inheritance." James paled beside me. I felt a chill run down my spine. Get rid of could mean many things, none of them pleasant. "What do you mean, get rid of?" I asked, trying to stay calm, though my heart was racing. "Not explicitly, Mom," Eric explained, rubbing his tired face. "She wrote about convincing the old folks to transfer assets during their lifetime and eliminating obstacles for access to the complete estate." A heavy silence fell in the room. The clock's ticking seemed louder, marking the seconds of that disturbing revelation. "Where is she now?" James asked, his normally gentle voice now laden with concern. "She went to her friend Vanessa's apartment," Eric replied. "But I think it's temporary. I'm almost certain she's going to New York, to her parents' house." "The parents who supposedly abandoned her in childhood?" I asked, unable to contain the irony. "Exactly," he replied with a bitter laugh. "Her father is Robert Williams, owner of Horizon Construction." The name hit me like a punch. Robert Williams was known in real estate. I never negotiated directly with him, but his reputation was of someone ruthless in business, though impeccable in his personal life. Ironic that his daughter had inherited only the first characteristic. "That means she didn't need our money," I concluded. "It was all—" "What? A game?" Eric put his glass on the coffee table and took his phone from his pocket. "I found this on her WhatsApp when she went to the bathroom to get her things." He showed us a conversation with someone saved as Leo. "How's the cash cow plan going?" Leonardo asked. "Better than expected. The old lady already dumped $350,000 into the company and doesn't even ask for detailed reports. Blindly trusts her little boy. Pathetic." I felt my face burn with anger and shame. Cash cow. That's how she saw me, like an animal to be milked until dry. "There's more," Eric slid his finger across the screen, showing other messages. She was planning to convince us to buy a bigger house in the Adirondacks so you would move there, away from the profitable properties. I looked at James, whose eyes now reflected a mixture of sadness and indignation. He had always been the family's peacemaker, the one who saw good in everyone. Seeing him so shaken was perhaps the most painful thing that night. "Son, have you contacted a lawyer yet?" I asked, returning to the pragmatic mode that characterized me in business. Eric nodded. "I have an appointment with Mr. Paul tomorrow morning. I'm going to file for divorce and immediate liquidation of the company. Whatever is left of the money you invested, Mom, will be returned." "Don't worry about that right now," I said, touching his knee. "Our focus is you, your emotional health." James stood up, going to the photo shelf where we kept family portraits. He picked up a frame from Eric and Jessica's wedding. Both smiled radiantly in the image. What an elaborate farce it had all been. 3 years, murmured Eric, watching his father. 3 years of my life based on a lie. How was I so blind? "Don't blame yourself," James finally spoke, putting the frame back on the shelf but face down. A symbolic gesture of closure. The worst blind person is the one who loves too much to see the other's flaws. Eric raised his eyes, surprised by his father's philosophical clarity. "She was good, son," I continued. "Manipulators are experts at finding good people and turning their qualities into weaknesses. Your generosity became naivety in her hands. Your love became a tool for control. And you? Have you ever let yourself be deceived by someone who claimed to love you? Have you ever felt that your best qualities were used against you?" Eric slept in his old room that night. Near midnight, I went there to leave a bottle of water on the nightstand, a habit I never lost since he was a child. I found him awake, staring at the ceiling. "Can't sleep?" I asked softly, sitting on the edge of the bed as I did when he had. "Nightmares." "I keep thinking about how she managed it," he replied without taking his eyes off the ceiling. "To deceive so many people for so long." "It's what sociopaths do best, son," I replied. "They study the people around them to discover exactly what each one wants to hear." "How did you know? How did you suspect her from the beginning?" I sighed, leaning back against the headboard. "In real estate, I learned to recognize when someone is selling a property that isn't worth the asking price," I explained. Her story was too perfect, every detail carefully constructed to evoke exactly the expected emotion. The difficult childhood to generate compassion, the environmentalist businesswoman to seem modern and aligned with the values of your generation, the respectful way she treated James to win him over. "And that flattering manner with you," Eric completed, now looking at me. "Always praising your achievements, asking for business advice." "Which she never followed," I added with a sad, half smile. "Sincere people make mistakes, have imperfect narratives, moments of inconsistency. Real life is full of edges. Her story was too polished." We were silent for a few minutes. Moonlight entered through the window, partially illuminating the room, where Eric grew up, surrounded by band posters, swimming trophies, and science books. "You know what hurts the most," he finally said. "It's not the money, not even the betrayal itself. It's knowing there was never any love, that while I dreamed of our family, our future children, she was calculating how long it would take to access your inheritance." My mother's heart broke seeing the pain in his eyes. Worse than physical pain is the pain of broken trust, of stolen innocence. "True love will come, son," I said, stroking his hair as I did when he was little, when you least expect it. He smiled weakly, disbelieving. At 32, my son felt as if his entire capacity to trust had been ripped from him. "I'll let you rest," I said, getting up. "Tomorrow will be a difficult day with the lawyer." When I reached the door, his voice stopped me. "Mom?" "Yes?" "Your perfume." He hesitated. "Has always reminded me of safety, since childhood. When you hugged me after school or took care of me when I was sick. That smell is the smell of home to me." I felt tears in my eyes as I gently closed the door. The next morning, I accompanied Eric to the office of Mr. Paul Mendoza, one of Atlanta's most respected attorneys and a longtime personal friend. He listened attentively as Eric recounted the events, occasionally taking notes on his yellow notepad. "We need to act quickly," the lawyer concluded after hearing everything, "mainly to protect what's left of the company's assets and prevent her from attempting any maneuver with the properties." "What properties?" Eric asked, confused. "The apartment belongs to my parents. We just rent it." Paul and I exchanged looks. It was time to reveal another secret. "Son," I began carefully, "when you got married, I put 2 commercial properties in your name, one in Atlanta and another in New York. They're registered in a family holding company, but you're the legal owner." Eric stared at me, dumbfounded. "What? Why did you never tell me?" "I always intended to tell you when you turned 35, I explained. "It was a way to secure your future, but I also wanted you to build your own career first without depending on these resources." "And Jessica knew about this?" he asked, understanding beginning to dawn in his eyes. "Apparently, yes," answered Mr. Paul, showing a document on his tablet. "Someone made an inquiry at the property registry approximately a year ago, requesting information about properties in your name. The IP of the computer used to make the request," I continued, "was traced back to EcoGuard's office." Eric ran his hands over his face, absorbing yet another betrayal. "So that's why," he murmured. "That's why she insisted so much on changing our property regime to partial community 6 months after the wedding, claiming it would be better for family asset protection." Mr. Paul nodded gravely. "Exactly. In case of divorce, she would be entitled to half of these properties, which are worth approximately $7 million together." In the days that followed, Eric plunged into a spiral of increasingly disturbing discoveries. In a hidden folder on Jessica's laptop, he found recordings of our private conversations, edited to seem more dramatic. She was creating an arsenal, he explained, showing the files to James and me, to use if she needed ammunition in the future. There were also payment receipts to a private investigator that Jessica had hired to dig into my past, looking for scandals or irregularities that could be used as leverage against me. The psychological impact on Eric was devastating. In the weeks following the divorce, he barely left his room, lost weight, and couldn't sleep without medication. I sought out the best psychologists in Atlanta, determined to help my son overcome the trauma of manipulation and emotional abuse he had suffered. "He needs to reframe this experience," explained Dr. Martha, the psychologist who finally managed to establish a connection with Eric. "Transform this pain into learning, this fragility into strength." I blamed myself for not intervening earlier, for not being more direct about my suspicions. James, with his serene wisdom, constantly reminded me that Eric needed to go through his own process. "You couldn't have prevented this, Susan," he would tell me on nights when I couldn't sleep. Some lessons we only learn by living them. 3 months after the divorce, I proposed a trip to Boston, the city where I started my first real estate business. Eric, already showing signs of recovery, accepted with an interest he hadn't shown in anything for weeks. "I want to show you where we came from, son," I explained. "Before the success, before the money, I want you to see how we built everything from scratch." The trip to Boston was a turning point in Eric's recovery. We walked through the streets of Old Boston, visited the small office where I made my first significant deal, now transformed into a craft shop. It was here that I signed the purchase of my first commercial building, I told him, as we observed the restored colonial facade. I was 27. Your father was finishing his doctorate, and you had just turned 1 year old. At the inn where we stayed, James surprised Eric with an old box full of letters and the ancient documents. "What's this?" Eric asked, curious. "These are the letters your mother wrote to me when she traveled on business," James explained, "and some of the first contracts and proposals she drafted. I've kept everything for over 30 years. That night, sitting on the inn's porch overlooking Boston Harbor, Eric read the letters one by one. Letters where I vented about sexism in real estate, the initial financial difficulties, the sleepless nights worrying about mortgages and loans. "I never imagined," Eric commented, holding a particularly emotional letter where I described how a bank had denied my 10th financing request. "You always seemed so confident, so unshakable." I smiled, remembering the time when each no seemed like an impossible wall to climb. "Confidence comes with time and experience, son," I replied. "But first comes doubt, fear, insecurity. The important thing is not to let them paralyze you." James joined us, bringing a bottle of New England wine. "Your mother was the most determined person I've ever met," he recounted, serving the glasses. "When everyone said no, she heard, 'Not yet.' When they said a woman couldn't build a real estate empire, she understood, 'A woman like you will be the first to do this.'" As the Atlantic breeze caressed our faces, I felt Eric truly relax for the first time in months. It wasn't just a trip to the family's past, but a reconnection with his roots, with the strength that ran in his veins without him knowing. Back in Atlanta, Eric began to rebuild his life. He officially closed EcoGuard and started working on a new project, an environmental management consultancy for real estate companies. He used the knowledge he had acquired to create something genuinely his, without Jessica's lies and manipulations. "I'm thinking of creating an awareness program about psychological abuse in relationships," he told me during one of our Sunday lunches 6 months after the divorce. "Something especially aimed at men, who often don't recognize when they're being manipulated." I felt immense pride seeing how he had transformed his pain into something constructive. "I'll finance the project," I offered immediately. "Entirely." James smiled beside me, squeezing my hand under the table. He knew how much this gesture meant to me, not just helping our son, but contributing so that other people wouldn't go through the same suffering. Life was taking its course, wounds slowly healing, when the unexpected happened. On a Friday morning, almost a year after the separation, Jessica appeared at our door. "Mrs. Susan," she said, using that melodious tone I knew so well, "can we talk?" She looked different. Thinner, shorter hair, simpler clothes than the expensive brands she used to wear. For a moment, I almost believed in the transformation. "Jessica," I replied coldly, "Eric isn't here." Actually, she hesitated, her eyes looking at the ground in a calculated demonstration of remorse. "It's with you I'd like to speak." Against my better judgment, I let her in. James was at the hospital for his routine heart exams, and I thought it would be better to face that situation alone. In the living room, Jessica sat on the edge of the sofa, as if trying to occupy as little space as possible, a studied posture of humility that didn't convince me. "I came to ask for forgiveness," she began, her eyes now teary. "I did terrible things, hurt wonderful people. I've spent the last year reflecting on my actions, doing therapy, reconnecting with my spirituality. I observed every micro-expression on her face as she unraveled her rehearsed monologue about personal growth and regret. The same eyes that gleamed with ambition now tried to convey contrition. The same mouth that smiled calculatingly now contorted in an expression of suffering. And I realized that what I felt for Eric was true love. I just didn't know how to demonstrate it in a healthy way," she continued. My parents never taught me what genuine love is, and Why are you really here, Jessica? I interrupted, tired of that performance. She seemed momentarily disarmed, as if not expecting to be interrupted so early in her presentation. I wanted a chance to speak with Eric, she finally admitted. Just a conversation. To apologize personally. And by chance, did this spiritual reconnection happen after you discovered that your ex-lover Leonardo was arrested for financial fraud? I asked calmly, seeing her eyes widen. The Leonardo she loved so much had been arrested 3 months earlier for a financial pyramid scheme that defrauded dozens of investors in New York. The news had been in all the papers. I see you remain well informed, she replied, abandoning part of the repentance facade. Always, I confirmed. Just as I know that your father cut off your allowance when he discovered the scandal of your divorce and your participation in Leonardo's scheme. Curious how your spiritual journey coincided exactly with the loss of your financial support. Jessica straightened her posture, dropping the mask of humility. Eric has a good heart, she said, as if that justified her presence there. He will listen to me. Yes, my son has a good heart, I agreed, standing up to indicate the conversation was over. And that's exactly why I won't allow you to approach him again. It's not your decision, she retorted, her voice now laden with that arrogance that had always existed beneath the veneer of likability. True, I agreed. It's his decision, and he made it clear he doesn't want contact. The protective measures he obtained against you are still in effect, by the way. Are you aware that your presence here is a violation? Her face paled. The protective measure had been Mr. Paul's idea, after we discovered the manipulated recordings and the plan to use information for blackmail. I didn't think he would actually go through with it, she murmured. Maybe you never really knew my son, I commented as I walked to the door. The real Eric, not the one you manipulated. He's stronger than you imagine. When I opened the door, I found Eric standing on the porch, his hand raised, about to use the key. Our eyes met, and I saw the exact moment when he noticed Jessica behind me. What is she doing here? He asked, his voice surprisingly firm. She was just leaving, I replied, making space for Jessica to pass. She stopped in front of Eric, looking at him with that expression that had so often won him over in the past. Eric, she began, using the affectionate nickname she used to call him. No, he interrupted her, taking a step back. I have nothing to say to you, and I don't want to hear anything you have to say. The firmness in my son's voice filled me with pride. It wasn't anger or bitterness he showed, but the quiet confidence of someone who knows their own worth. Please don't come back, he continued. The court order is still valid, and next time I'll call the police. Jessica looked from Eric to me, realizing she had lost. Without another word, she descended the porch steps and walked to the car parked on the street. Before getting in, she cast one last look at the house, not of regret, but of frustrated calculation. When she left, Eric relaxed his shoulders and smiled at me. Thank you, Mom, he said simply. For what? For teaching me to recognize the truth, even when it hurts. We entered the house together. On the hall table was a bouquet of fresh flowers that Eric had brought. Beside it, a small package wrapped in gold paper. What's this? I asked, curious. Open it, he replied with a smile. Inside the package, I found a bottle of my perfume, the same Chanel No. 5 I had been wearing for decades. The perfume that Jessica had called Old Lady Smell. To remind you that some things improve with time, Eric explained, like fine wine, sophisticated perfumes, and wisdom. 6 months later, during a launch event for the psychological abuse awareness program that Eric had created, I met Olivia, a young environmental engineer who worked on his new project. I observed from a distance how she looked at my son, not with Jessica's calculating admiration, but with genuine respect and sincere interest. Later that night, as James and I returned home, I commented about the young woman. "She seems different," I observed. "Authentic." "I noticed too," James agreed. "And did you see how Eric smiles when he's near her? It's not that anxious smile of someone trying to please. It's genuine." 3 months later, Eric officially introduced Olivia to us as his girlfriend. She was an intelligent, independent woman who had built her career with hard work and solid principles. The opposite of Jessica in everything that mattered. On a Sunday family lunch, weeks later, I went to the bathroom and found Olivia touching up her lipstick. She smiled at me through the mirror. "Mrs. Susan," she said with sincerity in her voice, "I hope you don't mind, but I borrowed a little of your perfume. It's wonderful." I smiled back, watching her spray a bit of my Chanel No. 5 on her wrist. "It looks lovely on you," I replied. At that year's Christmas dinner, when Eric announced his engagement to Olivia, I observed the family gathered around the table. James, with his now completely white hair, but the same gentle look as always. Eric, finally recovered from his emotional wounds, looking at Olivia like someone who has found a safe harbor. And Olivia, wearing the perfume I had given her as a gift, the same Chanel No. 5 that Jessica had despised, now proudly worn by 3 generations of strong women in our family. I realized then that my true legacy wasn't in the properties I built in 3 states, nor in the bank accounts I accumulated. It was there, in the wisdom I managed to pass on to my son, allowing him to finally recognize authentic value over empty appearances. That night, before going to bed, I sprayed my perfume as I had for more than 3 decades. The smell wasn't of an old person, as Jessica had said with disdain. It was the aroma of experience, strength, resilience, the perfume of a life lived with purpose and truth, without excuses or regrets. And you, what do you carry with you that others might not understand the value of? What marks of your history have been transformed into strength, into wisdom? Thank you for reading to the end. If this story touched you in some way, like and share it with someone who needs to hear this.